the time has come to tackle these internal corners of the upper tailgate. Hi, I'm Dave. Welcome back to 65 Fab. I'm not too sure exactly where this episode's going to go because, frankly, I'm not too sure how I'm going to go about fixing these corners. My guess is we're probably going to be turning the camera on and off over several days, maybe even a couple of weeks, while I work through piece by piece and break down the problem and see if we can fix it. If we look at the amount of rust damage across the entire inner flange and take it all, in a single view, it's pretty daunting. But I think what we can do is instead break it down into smaller sections and then just address the problem bit by bit. If I just draw some basic lines and see what we're dealing with, we know we've got good steel along here and we don't really want to touch that. I don't want to be welding up on it. And all the way back here, we've pretty much lost the flange, and then we go into this corner, but it's still good around here. So rather than having to rebuild this corner here, if I say come up approximately at the flange there, get above the rusted material, I can probably get all the way around this corner and then cut through perhaps sort of at this level. And we know that that's going to be relatively easy because all we're doing here is making the basic flange, taking it up and taking it around this corner. If we look at this section here though, really the metal is compromised all the way up. So we're going to have to really come around all the way over the top here, and then maybe we could come down. This is still good steel here, so perhaps we can keep that and come down to a similar, well, it's going to be pretty high, but similar line along there and cut down across this flange. I want to keep this center part of the flange here because this is actually undamaged, and it gives me a good reference point not only for the curve to match into, but a good reference that we can weld in and make sure it all sits flat. This center section here should be relatively easy because again we just say start here, we're keeping this good bit of steel. This is good here as well, so I want to keep that. So we can probably just make a small patch and fit it in there. So that should be pretty easy. This is nice and strong, so we'll weld up just below this line. Then we have this really ugly corner here. But again, if we break this down to say keeping, say the line here where we've got good steel on this side, the issue we have at this part is that along the top here, certainly up to about that section there, this is all compromised. So we know we have to go up and over the top of the line here. I've drawn that a bit high, but I'd probably try and keep it so I'm welding just above the curve here. Wherever the good steel begins is where I'll weld to. And then basically, if we treat that, ignoring the corner here for now, then what we end up with is this is just a curved flange, which we know we can do. It's a bit bigger than the one we did the other day, but it shouldn't be too big a deal to, get that shape nice with the dollies. And then we turn the flange underneath here. So again, this is another section that shouldn't be too bad. Then in this final corner, I've sort of had visions of having to make a wooden jig to bend around. However, this is actually good steel here, so I don't think this is nearly as difficult as I initially thought, because once again, I can just come up and about halfway along here, maybe a little bit higher, but we'll get it around this corner, and there's our patch. So we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 patches. And in fact, this patch, given that it's only this part along the top that needs to extend, I might even be able to do this in one piece, because we know we can bend that corner. You know, I think we can get around here by shrinking the flange that we make quite firmly, but we might be able to actually do that as a single piece. I guess this is really just going to take a fair bit of experimentation and fiddling around and, you know, working through to make each patch in turn. So rather than put you through the detail of me doing that, I think what I'll do is I'm just going to start forming each of the patches, and I'll come back and just check in and show you my progress and explain what I'm doing as I go. Probably warts and all if I muck it up. Oh, and just a quick shout out to Jordan Bennett, Bennett's Customs down in Dunsborough, because Jordan, along with Carl Fisher from Japan's Customs, and Howard Astle at Astle Design, these guys are really my inspo. They got me into wanting to do this stuff. I spent a lot of time on the YouTube channels learning from them. So yeah, just a shout out. Great guys, check out their channels. I've got those channels in the links below. Righto, so let's get started. First things first, I'll cut a couple of additional strips of steel and then start working on making the first of the flanges, and I'll get back to you with progress as I go along. It's several hours later now, and I just had one of those moments as the penny dropped. So I made this particular curve, and it almost got there, and we almost started to fit, but then I would get the base curve right and it wouldn't fit around the edge. So I thought, oh, it must be that I'm just not stretching around this top enough. So I thought, righto, I'll make myself a nice accurate set of patterns against the skin here, because obviously we're trying to match the inside corner of the skin here. And I've got this pattern, and we know that it all matches up. So then I created a new piece, and very carefully working from one end to the other. I think the first time when I started to shrink this one, I sort of just got in there, started shrinking around the middle, and sort of lost a bit of my angle. So I thought, no, got to do it the right way. And what you do is start, and I know Carl Fisher, I've seen recommend this several times, where what you do is you start at one end and work your way around. You don't start shrinking in the middle and just jump around. You literally start making the curve. So I've carefully done that, and we've got this beautiful curve now that matches, if I get it in the right light, it matches quite accurately to the pattern. So great. When I put it in, it's nowhere near fitting. It's like, what on earth am I doing here? So I started to scratch my head, and then the penny dropped. We're not interested in this inside curve, because that's going to be smaller. We're interested in this curve, and if we have a look at that, I'm nowhere near where I need to be. So arguably, maybe I was better off on the original, even though I sort of mucked around with the steel so much that I've split that. So I could use it, but I'd need to weld that up. However, the thing to do now is to go back and say, right, keep shrinking, but shrinking around this outside curve and see if that will fit. I've also, because it tends to pull in, I've put this through the English wheel to actually stretch over the top of this, so that there's a little bit more steel around this corner to hopefully not pull it in too much. So I'll keep stretching, we'll see how we go. And just like that, it's a new day. Sometimes I feel like, yeah, Dave, you've got this, you know, you can do this. Other days I just feel like I'm kidding myself. So we just talked about attempt number 1, didn't work, had a bit more of a play, completely broken. So attempt number 2, this is the one we thought we'd just have to do a little bit of shrinking around the edge and get to fit. Nope, error. Attempt number 3, we won't even talk about attempt number 3. And attempt number 4, I finally got it. After lots of playing around and lots of adjusting, we've actually got a reasonably tight fit. I still need to do a little bit more cleanup around this curve here, and the next step is to try and now take this top and start to bend this over the top curve, because this entire part here has got to be removed. But overall, we actually got the edge and the way it's fitting to come in quite nicely on this corner. If I flip it upside down, we can see a little bit better. We can see there really isn't much steel left here. In fact, the clecos are just hanging on by a thread in some spots. But importantly, as I go around here, the old rusty steel is pretty close to touching. The main difficulty I had is, while it's quite easy to actually, get these particular flanges to all bend, and we can get those fitting and just sit this back, as we come around the corner, we have to meet the material, so the top part of the flange has to lean back into the corner. So I'm shrinking around here, and it took a bit of fiddling around, but eventually you can get that curve pretty accurately to my patterns. In fact, I've got the pattern here and we've got a nice tight fit now. But because we got to lean back, I had to stretch this corner, and that's not an easy thing to do without, each time you stretch the top, I'd destroy the bottom. This is just one of the old pieces, well, the unsuccessful pieces, just to show you what I mean. And to stretch around this edge, again to pull it back, there's a few ways you can do it. I can put it here in the English wheel, and in fact with the fourth attempt I did use the English wheel to stretch around there as much as I could, just get a bit more surface area so that when I turned it should lean back. Still wasn't enough. I can then use the planishing hammer. In fact, I used the nylon hammers on the sandbag, and just over here banging on a nylon block, and that added a bit of stretch. Gently kept belting it to get a bit more stretch, and then using the planishing hammer, and the planishing hammer lets me sort of take those bumps and dents out, and we get it relatively smooth. In fact, I even have used the planishing hammer a few times to re-stretch the edges and push them back a little bit. But then finally got this little tool to save the day. So this is just a little honestly $45 air hammer from Supercheap, and what I did was simply took the bit on the end and ground it off, made it sort of flat and circular, and then I was able to use that on the inside. So I can get this to stand up, maybe not. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. Getting in here, I was able to actually use this and stretch, and boy oh boy, it just punches straight through. So I had to actually be quite gentle, but that allowed me to keep stretching around this corner until I could pull it back, giving me enough to lean back while maintaining, reasonably well, this bottom curve. Another important lesson I learnt from this process though is, when you're trying to dolly out the steel, you do not have to hit it hard at all. In fact, sometimes you almost can't hit it soft enough. I made this little round dolly on top here so that I could use it to work my way around and try and maintain this edge here, because as we saw, I was able to belt this edge out on the dollies after we'd put it through the pan brake to get the nice curve. But as I was bending, I kept losing my curve on the piece. So I had this dolly, and this allows me to sort of bang this flat and work through it. But one thing I learnt was you literally just have to tap, and it's almost a technique. And I know, again, I've seen others do this, where you're almost getting the piece and just almost sliding the hammer. You just have to be so soft. If you're not, the material moves just so quickly. You can quickly stuff it up, and once you've stretched too far, there's really no coming back. But ultimately, I've now got it fitting. I'm pretty happy with the way it fits. My next step is to now do a bit more cleanup around this edge, and I'm not going to cut the hole. I'm certainly not going to cut this patch until I scribe from behind later. So we'll, as I did with the top flange over here, I remove the steel from the bad steel. We remove that and then I scribe it to actually get the patch in the right place. So I'll do that same process, but before then I do need to see if I can turn this over now, because this part really, it's not going to be chopped off, it's going to be part of the main patch. So that's my next step. I'll keep going on it, and yeah, it's been a challenging process. I'll keep going. And that is one of 5 patches fitted. I've bent this edge over. I'm not kidding myself that, you know, this will take a little bit more manipulation probably. As I tack it in, I'll just have to, you know, re-dolly it and get it flat. But, you know, that will sit down once I've cut out the bottom of this flange here. This will all sit down. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's as far as I want to go with this patch for now, until we go around to cutting and tacking. So, yep. Okay, time to move on to the others. Righto, I've now put in the second patch, made the second patch and fitted it. This was an easy one because really it was simply this flange curve here that I again folded in the pan brake and then softened using the nylon hammer on the dollies. Then I've also made this one for this corner. And really I used just exactly the same techniques as I used on the other one we looked at earlier, but it came up really well. So I thought it's probably worthwhile if I walked you through the process of exactly what I did to get to this point. First up, of course, we've got to have a pattern to work with. So I've got this pattern that sits nicely in the corner, and we know the patch is going to come about halfway up, and it still is exactly the same fit halfway up. So that's largely as we would expect. However, as with the other corner that we looked at over there, it leans back, and in fact it leans back quite a bit in this corner here. So that's what we needed to deal with. So first up, folded the piece of steel in the pan brake, and then shrunk it around the corner around this pattern. Perhaps the most important thing that I learnt in doing this one was, I discussed earlier in the video the fact that when you're shrinking a corner, you start at one end and you work around. And so I started doing that, and one of the things I realized is, as you work around, it can actually be quite tricky to work out where's the next part you want to shrink, because if you shrink too early, it comes in, and then of course you've got to shrink it out. And what I found is, and if I can exaggerate it a little bit here, what we're looking at is, I looked for the point where, say, it was sitting around the bottom where my thumb is, and then what you're looking for is the pivot point. So say it's fitting reasonably well here, and it's fitting reasonably well here, then it's the pivot point where we want to be shrinking. And it's just a very slow process, but if you take your time, and always what I found is look for, you know, if it's right there and it's right there, find where the pivot is, find where that little swing is, and that's where you want to shrink. Because if you do that, it prevents it from suddenly ending up in a situation where, you know, you think you're right, but you've actually curved the top around too much. So that pivot point I found to be really important. And then came the process of getting this back wall of the flange to lean back. And that's where this baby came into it again. And what I found was, you know, again, working from the middle. In fact, what I'll do, I'll bring the camera a little bit closer so we can see what I'm talking about here. Move it down. Great cinematography here. So basically, you know, we're working from the middle, and we know where we're trying to stretch, and then just keep working it around. One thing I did find, this thing, I'm just going to turn it on for a second, and I did it on the wood block, and then I found doing it on the nylon block. The wood block gave a lot of bite, and you got a lot of depth really quite quickly, so you were able to like stretch the metal really quickly. But on the nylon block, I was able to actually smooth it out. It's a bit more like planishing. So, just to give you an idea, this thing at full tilt is full on. what I was trying to do is just very gently, you know, it's hard to explain. It's like as low as I can get this thing to go, that's what I was doing, and by doing that, it's able to just, and that alone, it doesn't sound like much, but I'll tell you what, it punches the steel and it really does bend it quickly. And importantly, as that's happening, the bottom patch, the bottom patch there, the bottom curve, sorry, didn't really move. And so what I was able to do is just keep checking all the way up to make sure that halfway, and in fact up the top as well, that we maintained exactly that curve. Now, of course, every time we hit it with the little air hammer, you know, and we start stretching more, it all gets out of whack, it gets out of form. So I would then come here on this dolly that we looked at before that I made, and again, just with the nylon hammer, you're able to just bring it around and you start to make sure that you get your form more on this edge that we're trying to push back. You know, in exaggerated form, we're trying to lean it back like that. So just the nylon hammer, a little bit of very gentle, flat planishing hammer, a nice polished planishing hammer here, a little bit of that as well. And that really just helped me to maintain this edge and to keep this pushed back. And then it's sort of back and forth. We're going to from the dollies back to the air hammer, and then literally you're just pushing it with, you know, when I have my gloves on, with your thumb, you're able to push it into the right form, so it actually starts forming the right shape. And what we've ended up with is, in one go instead of 4 goes, really a pretty close fit. It's not 100% into the corner there, it's not bad. You know, if I look down I can see a little bit of an air gap, but I also have to consider that all this material needs to be cut out so it will sit a bit better. Pretty pleased with that. You know, it does show that at least I learnt something in doing the 4 attempts on that end, and this end's come up really well. Alright, time for this one. We're going to do something different here. For this final patch, we know we need to flange it in 2 different directions. We've got to take out a piece of steel, we're going to flange it back, curve it back over the top, so we capture this curve, and then we'll kick out and bend the bottom flange exactly as we've done with the others. We know that this dolly here is pretty much, it's a 20mm dolly, and it pretty much fits, you know, nicely into this curve. So that's our shape. We could try and do it the same as we did the earlier ones, which is to use the pan brake behind me, bend the gentle line into it, and then over the dollies with the nylon hammer, we're bending the, you know, softening the curve. But this is kind of big, and while it worked pretty much down the end with the earlier patch, because it was only a small section, this one I want to get nice and straight. So I want to do the same thing. I still want to use the pan brake if we can, but I want to bend it in a much larger curve. Ironically, about 2 days ago, Carl Fisher at Make It Custom, Jap Hands Customs, literally just posted a video with an idea of how to do this. So what Carl did was he got a piece of pipe, this is a bit of solid bar, but he got a piece of pipe and he actually put it under the jaws of the pan brake and bent around that. His was even bigger. So I've got a 20mm bar here, and I've set back the offset between the teeth and the brake being the arm that swings up here, as much as this machine will allow. And given that this is 20mm, I thought, well, the obvious would be if I could get back 10mm, that would be, you know, the radius, that would work. It looks like it maxes out at about 7.5 to 8mm, about 7.5. So what I'm going to try and do is just see now, can I lock this underneath the teeth, and what happens if we try and bend? So we'll give it a red hot shot. Incredibly, it actually, the pan brake allows me to open up enough that I can get this in, and the bar is, these teeth are quite fat, they're quite thick, so when I look down the length of it, the round bar is pretty much sitting smack bang in the middle of the teeth, which ironically are probably about 20 mil. And I can line this up so that the front of the front edge is just behind the brake line. So I can see where we're sitting there. Now, ideally what I want to do, before I lock this down, I'm just going to use the brake, see if I can push it in a little bit, because we want to maintain, you know, that sort of 1 millimeter gap or thereabouts to make sure that we can bend around it, and that seems to be pretty good. So the next big question is, can I get the actual material under it? So I've put a line here, I scribed a line at about 15 mil. So let's just see how high can I get this to go. Okay, I think what I need to do is to get something to hold that up. I have no real idea how we managed to do this, so we're just winging it. As long as I'm pretty much straight along this edge, and then I can line this bar up with my front edge. Frankly, anything could happen here. Okay, big question now is, will this lock? You know what? I don't think it's going to lock. That might throw me. I don't think it's going to work. Because as soon as I try and bend this without locking, it's going to move. How can I lock that down? Not going to work. Oh well, try something else. Well, I thought that was going to be a dismal failure. However, when I turned off the camera, I thought, there's one more thing I can try. And that is that the issue I had was when we had the bar underneath the teeth here, I couldn't lock down the handle because the handle was too far, really, it was pushed right over there. There was no way to lock it. So I thought, oh, okay, let's try one more thing. And I backed off this mechanism so that the handle locking mechanism was as far as it could possibly go. And it was borderline. I'm not 100% sure I'd want to try it again, but incredibly, it worked. Amazing. So if we actually have a look here, you couldn't get much closer to a fit than that one. So that worked really well. We've now got the first part of it. So what I'm going to do is I'll reset the pan brake to a more realistic offset, and I'll see if I can just bend the other flange. I think this one I'm going to try. Someone in the comments on one of my videos suggested actually using the offset and leaving it back a little bit and just using the offset to get a curve, and that might actually give us the smoother curve without me having to dolly it. So I'm going to give that a try, and we'll see how it goes. I'll report progress in a second. And here we have it. So I did set the pan brake back and used that to make the curve, and the curve was close. I still need to touch it up a little bit, and I'm not 100% convinced that I don't like my way better. But it did certainly make the curve without me having to spend a lot of time dollying it. So it worked. And I guess that's probably a reasonable place to finish this episode. We've now got each of the patches basically installed. They're in place just with Clecos. And so my next job is going to be to I'll remove the patches, cut out the old steel, scribe the patches, and start fitting them in. So start tacking them back in. I think I'm going to do them one at a time, rather than take them all off and have it all move around. I think if I put do one patch at a time, leaving the others in place, except for this one, that's going to be the last one anyway, because it needs this corner, so that's got to be finished before I know how to fit it. But really, I think that's what I'm going to do, is just start working my way around, cut out the material, start tacking each one in, and then hopefully it'll start to look like a completed frame before too long. So thanks for joining me. Please hit subscribe, hit likes if you can, that helps, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.